What happens when a monk becomes a millionaire? Not by choice, not for himself, but through circumstance, exile, and the quiet construction of a global empire. CIA payments, secret donations, Silicon Valley meetings, and a financial machine that still moves millions without ever calling itself one. This isn't a conspiracy theory. It's all documented, declassified, verified by sources from the New York Times to Reuters to US government audits. At the center of it all, a man sworn to own nothing, the 14th Dalai Lama. Born in a remote village, raised as a living god, and forced into exile by the time he was 23. He never built a company, never launched a product, but across 6 decades, his name has become a global brand, backed by institutions, foundations, donors, governments, and a war chest worth more than most people realize. Today, we're diving into the paradox no one talks about. How the world's most famous monk ended up at the helm of a financial network that spans continents, touches Hollywood, and has navigated everything from Cold War espionage to cult scandals. Not to generate profit, but to preserve a people, to fund a cause, and to keep a nation alive in exile. This is the story of the Dalai Lama's hidden fortune. Let's start at the beginning, when a 2-year-old boy was told he was a god. Tibet, 1935. In a small village called Taksur, a 2-year-old boy named Lama Thondup is living the life of a farmer's son. His family is poor, the house is modest, there are no cameras, no headlines, no hint of destiny. But far away in the monasteries of Lhasa, something has been set in motion. The 13th Dalai Lama has died, and the search for his reincarnation is underway. According to Tibetan tradition, the soul of the Dalai Lama is reborn, somewhere, in someone, and it's the job of the monks to find him. They arrive in Taksur quietly, testing, watching, asking questions. They show the boy toys and relics from the previous Dalai Lama's life. He picks the right ones, repeatedly, and in 1939, the announcement is made. The child is the 14th incarnation of Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion. He's 2 years old, and he's just been named the spiritual and political leader of Tibet. The boy is taken from his family and moved to the Potala Palace in Lhasa. From there, his life becomes something almost unimaginable, a blend of intense spiritual education and immense political pressure. He studies scripture, philosophy, debate, governance. At age 15, he is formally enthroned as the head of state. He is still learning how to write, but he is now expected to lead a nation. For centuries, the Dalai Lama wasn't just a monk. He was a monarch, a theocratic ruler presiding over an isolated kingdom in the Himalayas, where religion and politics were inseparable. But the 14th Dalai Lama would be the last to hold that title, because just outside Tibet's borders, a revolution had already begun, and it was coming for everything he had just inherited. The year is 1950. The People's Republic of China is barely a year old, but already looking outward. Mao Zedong sends troops into Tibet. The invasion is framed as liberation, but it is military occupation by another name. The Dalai Lama is just 15, too young, too sheltered, too unprepared for war. And yet, as the Chinese army advances, he is forced to negotiate, signing a 17-point agreement under pressure, one that formally brings Tibet under Beijing's control. For nearly a decade, he tries to coexist with the Chinese regime. He travels to Beijing, meets with Mao, tries diplomacy, but resistance is simmering across Tibet. In March of 1959, it explodes. An uprising breaks out in Lhasa. Thousands of Tibetans surrounded the Dalai Lama's palace, afraid he will be kidnapped or killed. The Chinese military moves in. The situation becomes volatile, fast. Disguised as a soldier, the Dalai Lama escapes under cover of night. He crosses the Himalayas on horseback. After 15 days of travel, he reaches India. He will never return to Tibet again. But what came next wasn't just spiritual exile. It was geopolitical. Declassified CIA documents later revealed something few suspected at the time. The Tibetan resistance was being funded by the United States. In the thick of the Cold War, the Dalai Lama's cause became a proxy weapon against China. The CIA funneled $1.7 million a year into Tibetan guerrilla fighters, and according to a 1997 New York Times report, $180,000 of that went directly to the Dalai Lama's office. He was now, knowingly or not, on the US payroll. The irony is sharp. A monk devoted to nonviolence caught in the machinery of global espionage. His public message was compassion, but behind the scenes, Washington saw him as something else. A Cold War asset, a soft power symbol for the free world. And with that came money, influence, and the first bricks in what would become a sprawling, stateless empire. Dharamshala, India. A sleepy hill town in the foothills of the Himalayas becomes the new capital of a nation that technically doesn't exist. Here, in exile, the Dalai Lama begins building something no spiritual leader had attempted before: a functioning government without borders, land, or army. They call it the Central Tibetan Administration. There's a cabinet, ministries, a department of finance, education, information, even foreign affairs. The structure mirrors a sovereign state, except it's operating from rented land with no formal recognition and no steady tax base. So how do you fund a shadow government? Donations. Lots of them. From Buddhist centers around the world, from celebrity supporters, from Western government sympathetics to the Tibetan cause. In the 70s and 80s, US congressional aid quietly picks up where the CIA left off, this time in the form of humanitarian assistance. By the 2000s, the Exile administration is receiving millions per year from the US government. Other donors include NGOs, churches, monasteries, and private philanthropists, people who see the Dalai Lama not just as a monk, but a symbol of moral clarity in a chaotic world. And that symbol generates serious soft power. Over time, the donations fund schools, clinics, libraries, cultural preservation projects. Tibetan settlements across India and Nepal begin to flourish. Refugee communities stabilize. Identity is preserved. By any measure, it becomes one of the most successful stateless organizations on the planet. But here's the part that's easy to miss. The Dalai Lama owns none of it. No personal property, no portfolio, no private foundation under his name. And yet, everything, every school, every office, every fundraiser functions under his moral authority. He's not holding the checkbook, but he's the reason it exists. It's not just faith, it's infrastructure. And the money, once a lifeline, is starting to become something more. A system. By the late 1980s, something shifts. The Dalai Lama isn't just a religious figure in exile anymore. He's a global icon. In 1989, he's awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. Not long after, Hollywood shows up. Richard Gere, Brad Pitt, the Beastie Boys. Films like 7 Years in Tibet and Kundan put his story on screen. Concerts are held, speeches go viral. Compassion becomes a brand. And suddenly, the Tibetan cause isn't just noble. It's trendy. Money flows in. Millions in annual donations from Buddhist communities, nonprofits, private donors, foundations. Some of it is spiritual. Some of it is political. All of it tax deductible. Charitable trusts are established. The Dalai Lama Foundation, the Dalai Lama Trust, the Ganden Podrang Foundation in Switzerland. They manage scholarships, peace conferences, educational grants. By now, the Exile network includes schools, libraries, publishing houses, retreat centers, even universities, spanning from India to the US to Europe and Southeast Asia. The Dalai Lama himself owns nothing. No personal bank account, no luxury residence. But the organizations tied to him, they're sitting on tens, possibly hundreds of millions in global assets. Reuters, the South China Morning Post, and the Tibet Fund all point to the same rough estimate. The ecosystem built in his name may be worth up to $150 million. Some speculative figures go higher, approaching $3 billion when you include affiliated institutions. but those numbers remain unverified. What's clear is this. The Dalai Lama became the centerpiece of a financial network with global reach, not a fortune for himself, but a machine for movement. And once the money started flowing, it didn't always come clean. No empire grows without complications, even a spiritual one. In the 1990s, cracks began to show, starting with a name most people would never accept, Aum Shinrikyo. Before the Japanese cult carried out the 1995 Tokyo subway gas attack, its leader, Shoko Asahara, positioned himself as a Buddhist reformer. He met with the Dalai Lama multiple times, donated money, a lot of it. Over $1.5 million flowed from Aum Shinrikyo to the Dalai Lama's office between 1988 and 1992. In one case, a single check for $1.2 million. At the time, Asahara was seen as eccentric but spiritual. After the attack, everything changed. He became known as the mastermind behind a mass murder, and suddenly, headlines started tying the Dalai Lama to what became known as a doomsday cult. The Dalai Lama publicly condemned Asahara, called it a mistake, said he'd been misled. But the damage to his reputation, however brief, was real. Then came NXIVM. In 2009, the Dalai Lama accepted an invitation to speak in Albany, New York, hosted by what was, on paper, a self-help group. NXIVM would later be exposed as a sex cult involved in trafficking, branding, and coercion. The Dalai Lama canceled, then reversed, then appeared on stage next to NXIVM's founder, Keith Rainier. Why? Investigators later traced a $1 million donation from NXIVM patrons. Within days of the visit, a new Dalai Lama trust was registered in the US, and financial records show roughly $2 million in contributions that year. Publicly, his office denied any direct payment, but the optics were hard to ignore. Another shady group, another large donation, another moment of regret. And the scandals didn't stop there. In the Tibetan exile community, lawsuits erupted over favoritism, missing funds, and mismanagement. High-ranking officials were accused of enriching themselves. Political rivalries boiled over. Critics said too much money was being spent on fancy offices and too little on actual refugees. All while China amplified every mistake. State media painted the Dalai Lama as a hypocrite, a pawn, a slave owner from old Tibet. And although much of it was propaganda, the attacks stuck in places that mattered. Government halls, donor circles, public opinion. Even amongst empire, it turns out, is still an empire. And now, in the 21st century, it's quietly modernizing. Today, the Dalai Lama is in his late 80s. He lives in a modest residence in Dharamshala, travels less, speaks softly, but the empire built in his name is more global and more influential than ever. He meets with tech CEOs, Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk. He speaks at conferences on neuroscience, artificial intelligence, compassion economics, not as a guest of honor, as a moral compass. Behind the scenes, the Dalai Lama Foundation and affiliated trusts continue to manage scholarships, grants, and global education efforts. Monasteries have been rebuilt, schools funded. Thousands of young Tibetans educated under the exile system. Scientists collaborate with monks to study meditation in university labs. And the money? Still flowing. In the US alone, Tibetan exile programs receive up to $12 million a year in government support. Private donations add millions more. His book royalties and speaking fees, all of it go directly to charitable entities. By policy, he doesn't touch his cent. He has no bank account, no stocks, no estate. But he is, functionally, at the center of a multi-million-dollar ecosystem. One that funds not just cultural preservation, but political resistance, education, media, international advocacy, quiet influence. And the question hanging over it all is, what happens next? The Dalai Lama has said he may not reincarnate, or that if he does, it will be somewhere China can't reach him. The Chinese government, meanwhile, is preparing to install its own official Dalai Lama, one they can control. The succession crisis isn't just spiritual, it's financial, it's geopolitical, it's existential. Can the institutions he built survive without him? Will the donors stay? Will the network hold? Because this isn't just a monk's legacy. It's a country in exile, a culture in limbo, a movement funded by the tension between belief and real-world survival. And when the man at the center is gone, the system he built will have to stand on its own. The Dalai Lama swore off wealth. He took a vow of celibacy, of humility, of personal renunciation. He doesn't own a car. He doesn't carry cash. His daily meals are served by attendants in a government in exile that technically doesn't exist. And yet, his name moves millions. Book royalties, speaking fees, international awards, foreign aid. Tax-deductible donations from Silicon Valley billionaires and Midwestern Buddhists alike. None of it for personal gain. All of it for institutions, schools, hospitals, cultural programs, political advocacy, a stateless people with nowhere else to turn. He built one of the world's most unusual financial ecosystems, not by designing it, but by embodying it. By being the reason strangers send checks, the reason presidents pick up the phone, the reason journalists still care. It's the paradox at the heart of his legacy. A man who owns nothing, yet oversees everything. He's not the CEO, he's not the fund manager, but he's the gravity, the operating system, the reason the whole thing works. And in that paradox, there's a quiet question. Can wealth ever be pure? Can money serve compassion without corrupting it? The Dalai Lama once said, "Use money as a tool, not as a goal." He's lived by that, but the empire around him, it's still figuring that out. The Dalai Lama's fortune isn't in his wallet. It's in the institutions built in his name. The schools, the clinics, the quiet power of a culture that refused to disappear. His story isn't just spiritual. It's financial, political, global. And it leaves us with a question that doesn't go away. Can money and morality ever truly coexist? If you want to see how other unlikely figures built influence, wealth, or power without ever seeming to chase it, subscribe. This is Bedlam Bear, and we'll see you in the next one.